Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday night. We are Debate Sensei. I am Jared Kubika Miller, your debate coach, professor of communications. And we got Tim Seavey from San Diego State University and Visolutions. Yeah. Matt was supposed to meet me in this sauna, but he showed up to the wrong sauna.
Oh. Whew.
Yeah. So that's all that happened there. Yeah. Too bad. Anyways, we are going to be talking about, there's a good one. We're going to be talking about our third topic for the NPTE, National Parliamentary Tournament of Excellence. They released 5 topics. Oh, yeah, and we wanted to mention that we were just out of the loop. Apparently, they've been doing this for a long time, right?
Like a really long time.
Yeah. It just kind of shows how old we are. You know what I mean? Like, it really does. We've been doing this. I've been doing it for a while. Like, I seriously.
I mean, when you were there, they didn't do this, right?
No.
Like, you have firsthand knowledge that, like, it's not that we missed the train entirely. There was a period when it was good old-fashioned 15-minute prep parley.
Now, you can look me up. 2003, I think it was. I don't even remember. Yeah, I was there. I was at the tournament. Okay, I did it.
Remember when they didn't?
Yeah. But that was like the only the third year that they actually recorded the results or something like that. And so,
wow,
I'm sure anyone watching this is probably thinking to themselves, that guy doesn't know what it's really like for NPTE. It'd be like saying, like the first people go into the Super Bowl and they had leather caps and stuff like that. And it's like,
these guys are soft these days with their cushy pads, their fancy cleated shoes.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here, like, you guys get to know what your topics are beforehand. Oh my God.
Using the internet to research them.
Yeah. And like you only have 5 topics. Like I had, so 6 prelim rounds, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So I probably had 10 or 11 topics total.
Which is, like a standard, deep, intense parley tournament. Like that's, that is the nature of, that's how NPTE rolls. But actually, here I am saying this, and then I don't know whether that's the case or not. And they'll be like, nah, NPTE's published their topics now for 10 years. But in any case, I think it's pretty neat. I've talked to a few people that have both been in it real deep, and a lot of coaches and things that are surrounding it. And they say that it actually does create like a really cool environment for the tournament. Like debaters really like it because you don't end up with really squirrely, weird stuff you got to respond to on the fly. Or you do, but at least it's well researched. So it really changes a lot of the way that you argue things like topicality and like what a prep time skew is when you don't have months of prep time, right?
Yeah.
Or various critical positions, even like, okay, you had the opportunity to research this kind of thing. There's a lot of those, grounds arguments that have to do with limited prep time just go away. So that changes, and I think that's kind of cool. I would be both intimidated by it because it turns into policy times 5 minus 8 months.
Yeah.
But also it's gonna create some really cool debate. So I'm interested, and I like these topics. If nothing else, I really dig the topics.
Okay. Yeah. And these ones are cool. These ones are cool. The one that we're talking about right now is the artificial intelligence and healthcare. And I'm like, wow, that's awesome. That's there's a few things that I've come across recently that have to do with it, and I'm glad to kind of bring it into this discussion today. But the first thing I thought of when I saw artificial intelligence in healthcare, I'm kind of like, damn, that's good for the affirmative.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, there's a little bit more nuance to it in that it is the USFG should substantially increase investment. So it's not just like, hey, we should incorporate AI into healthcare. Because I think there's a lot of like non-inherent arguments for that. Like there's new AI medical inventions every day, it feels like new applications for it constantly. But when it comes down to the federal government heavily investing in something, now you end up with a little more interesting ground of like, is that really the federal government's space? Does the federal government have like really the authority to be throwing around taxpayer dollars behind this? Like, are they really the best actor? Because there's also a lot of snake oil in the AI space. Like, for all of the thousands of startups that are about it, I'm sure a lot of them are really ill-formed, but just look really good on like a government grant proposal, right? So I think there comes ground of like, is the government really the best entity to be doing the investing? Like, does the US federal government know better than all these hedge funds that are backing various AI plays? Like, I think that it starts to get really dicey there when the oldest, slowest, most boring, out of the loop body is in charge of like the newest, most, cutting edge decision making. So I think that there's a little bit of interesting negative ground just to be talking about like actors there and whether or not that investment will be put to good use. But I think that that's where the topic gets even cooler. So yeah, it is really good for the AF because you've got really big, cool, tangible, like relevant topical harms that you can then do a lot of solving because AI is going to solve a lot of things.
Yeah, I just think that you get to kind of like pick a healthcare crisis and then kind of say, how can AI solve it?
Yep.
You know what I mean? You just pick the one that you like. Yeah. And the thing is like, how do you and so you can prepare some really good, like I do have some good stuff and we're going to talk about it today, but I think that like, I don't know. Let's do the affirmative. Let's start with the affirmative. That's fun stuff because like when you just type it, when you just Google artificial intelligence, healthcare,
yeah,
some really fun stuff comes up.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's immediately
awesome stuff.
For sure. So I think probably the most obvious low-hanging fruit, straightforward, easy thing is COVID, right? Like there are so many countries, particularly like I did a lot more research into South Korea and some of the ways that they were able to mitigate the effects of the virus at the beginning and flatten their curve every time they have seen an additional spike has been heavily reliant upon AI. And most recently, they invested $2.2 trillion into AI as like a sector of the Korean economy. Like that's like a huge portion of their national budget going into the development of AI technology, largely because of how they were able to solve so many things, related to COVID, but also because they just want to be a leader in the space. They recognize that there isn't as strong of a single nation's leadership in that area. So they're just investing really heavily into it. But I mean, so many of their ways for like, they developed like tests faster than anyone else and contact tracing was so much better. And like analysis of chest x-rays, like their ability to combat COVID using AI is just miles beyond where so many other countries, also the US, are. And so I think that's like your very easy, super relevant, very tangible link story or harm stories. Like this is going to demolish the global economy. The better we do against it, the better every, living, breathing being does. So like, let's invest in this right now.
So my first reaction to like AI for COVID was kind of like, it's too late. That's if I was on the neg, I'm like, that's too late to start like a federal, you know what I mean? Like passing law. And by the time it's passed and you disperse the budget and the, it gets to and then people spend it and they make their choices on who they're going to, what companies they're going to buy their AI from and, implement it and stuff like that. Like we already have vaccines. Like they're being implemented. I don't get me wrong. I think that you could still get some offense off of it, but the time frame debate might be like way more relevant for a COVID approach than some other topics, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's my first impression. I'm not saying it's like some silver bullet on it or anything like that, but it definitely that's my first sort of reaction. Kind of like,
yeah.
Yeah, well, it would have been nice 8 months ago, maybe.
I think that said, though, like I think most, parties out there expected things to be better 8 months ago than they are right now. So like our predictions are consistently wrong in the wrong direction.
Right.
Like, okay, because we expect to get better, we're not going to implement this thing. I think you're right, though. Like that would definitely take a huge edge off of it because it's, knock on wood, probably not going to get worse, like with vaccines rolling out en masse. Like one can hope that means that the curve goes down. and there's not like the holidays coming up or something. So I think that there's probably a good case to be made for that. I still think though that because it's just so super salient of like every single day, like the fact that this debate is even happening online is all exclusively because of one cause. And if there's anything we can do to mitigate or, speed up the solution to return to normalcy, like that should absolutely be implemented. So I think you've got some really like easy, low-hanging fruit to solve there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's carry on with the low-hanging fruit. Like one of the biggest killers in the world consistently year over year is malaria. And AI actually, like one of the articles that I came across when I was researching for this particular discussion was about detecting malaria using AI. And, you have like blood samples and stuff like that. It requires like, professional examination in order to detect malaria and then treat it. You can just send those blood samples and get it into AI. You know what? I think it might be good to talk a little bit about what AI generally conceptually is,
Sure.
because people just think about it as like
the movie with Will Smith.
Yeah. Or Terminator, you know what I mean? Or, all those things. But machine learning is I prefer that phrase because artificial intelligence it kind of humanizes the art, it humanizes this thing, and it's not really human-like intelligence. Human intelligence is sort of affected by a whole bunch of things that machine learning will never take into account. You know what I mean? Like, human relationships and empathy and stuff like that. Those things are not going to be part of artificial intelligence. That, like, we consider those things to be very intelligent. That's part of our intelligence. You're very smart if you are able to incorporate those things into your decision making. But those things aren't incorporated into machine learning. You know what I mean? It's like I think machine learning kind of in my opinion, it just kind of captures it a little bit closer.
Well, it's the more I look into it, it's technically a subset, right? Like machine learning and artificial intelligence are not interchangeable. Typically, machine learning is thought of as a subset, a very large subset, but a subset of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence at a larger basis is machines making decisions, right? So we program them. So you get all the way back to like Turing machines, right? Like in the 60s,
right?
Still artificial intelligence because it's capable of making decisions and finding patterns better than humans because humans tell it if this, then this. So like the if then logic gate kind of thing has been around a long time. But even that is not being implemented particularly well in the healthcare space. So I think the ground for like AI, like the bar is ridiculously low when you say just implementing artificial intelligence into this space. Like having a simple logic gate that anytime that a nurse checks in a patient with these symptoms, direct them to this particular diagnosis, like that is already artificial intelligence. So machine learning is where you get deep learning type things where it's, looking at large data sets with, supervised learning to be able to say, here are, all of the cases that we've experienced of this particular, malaria. These are all the symptoms. These are all the things to identify. Now do a better job identifying it than humans have, like cut out the errors. That I think is really where we want AI to be. That's a better version.
Right. So like, I guess, I mean, when you talk about definitions for artificial intelligence, we even skipped that whole thing. Like defining artificial intelligence is probably going to be, more of an issue than I, kind of gave it credit for at first. Like, is any algorithm artificial intelligence?
Yep.
Like, what I mean? Like,
right? Like, I think the bar is pretty low.
Yeah. Because I really thought that like artificial intelligence was kind of a higher standard than just like, hey, we wrote this sort of rule set, and now you can push your data through it, and it gives you results. Like maybe that might be a really good sort of critical area to explore, if not a topicality area to explore. You know what I mean? It's like, man, I would love it if people just start saying algorithms are not artificial intelligence. All right. Just because you wrote a set of rules, no matter how good those set of rules are, that is not artificial intelligence. You know what I mean? It's like the ability to kind of like take data and add to your, or sort of modify, evolve your decision making based on that data seems to be sort of necessary when you're talking about intelligence. You know what I mean? It's like, otherwise an algorithm is static, right? It's hard coded. It doesn't sort of add data and make different outcomes based on, like past history.
Sure. I mean, like in very basic forms, yeah, like there of course exist algorithms that do take that kind of thing in. So I think that it just behooves any affirmative team to be really, really clear with that kind of thing. And also, neg teams to be able to start chipping away at that. So I think you're definitely right. Like being able to define those terms clearly and trying to, pigeonhole the affirmative team into like even one subset of it. Like this needs to be like a neural network developed into or baked into it, because like modern AI, X% of companies are employing neural networks, because even within deep learning or even within machine learning, not all machine learning involves neural networks. That's like when we think of the most advanced AI, that is almost always neural networks. But even within that, there's actually dumber versions. Like there are much more simple versions of AI or of machine learning than we give it credit. So I think that that's certainly an important distinction, but that's, I think, where you end up also with some really unsexy, probably really successful cases, like the administrative paperwork case. I find it to be like, that would be so freaking killer because it's boring and no one cares. So I would just make like my agent of action, or I would make my target, the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and just talk about the fact that the United States spends an unfathomable amount of money. We spend $9,400 per capita on like our citizens for healthcare, and like less than half of healthcare expenditures go into planning, regulating, managing medical services. But even still, like the administrative side is a huge chunk of that. And yes, it employs a whole bunch of people. And yes, those people would probably lose their jobs with lots of AI in it. So there's already like, you need to have some frontline against that. But it's the development of, the plow, right? Like, I put a whole lot of like digging equipment out of business, or like the ride-on tractor put a lot of, like at every level, a new huge development in technology is going to put humans out of jobs. But I think this is an area that's going to save ridiculous amounts of money, like billions and billions of dollars.
And if you take the thing is, if you take that approach with like the administrative aspect of it, that's one of the major arguments about like socializing medicine, where the privatized system is a whole lot of just fat. You know what I mean? Just inefficiency, because they have a whole bunch of paper pushers that are working on these things. Whereas if you have an algorithm that kind of helps, like make these decisions without any sort of bias or anything like that, that is what's going. And a weird sort of roundabout way, you can solve the United States privatized healthcare system with AI without socializing it.
Sure. Yeah, like it's so much easier to pay for everyone's healthcare if we aren't also paying for like the ridiculous amount of bureaucratic bloat that goes behind Medicare, Medicaid types of things. Like those programs already exist. The US is already pretty cool with them. They're like, yep, Medicare's a thing, and we're, millions, tens of millions of Americans use it. So expanding that, I think, was kind of a popular policy for a little while, but like a large portion of that also can be solved by just waving the magic wand of AI, like figuring when forms come in, here's ways to pass them through, just how things are processed. So, I think there's a little misspelling there, but it'd be get the most out of AI before it learns about the concept of crappy jobs. Yeah, really, because like I'm sure that's grueling. Like someone that is working as like an administrative assistant in like a Medicare office, that is probably not a super satisfying job. Especially if your job is like denying claims or like fighting against that. It's a rough job. Like even if you're super great at your job, you're denying people care that really badly need it, or claims and things. Like there's all kinds of issues with that. So if all that system were to be entirely automated, which like there exists lots of solutions. Like you call Google these days and their AI, like customer service all the way through, is a robot the entire way through, and it is better than any customer service representative you've ever spoken with that is a human being. Like it totally exists. So the administrative flow of all of that could be a massive savings. It's definitely not a sexy case, but it would really, I think, play out well in the amount of savings. And then also you can probably quantify like deaths if you wanted to that come from administrative errors, and like so and so didn't get the thing processed, so they were sent out of the hospital when they should have been brought back. Like those kinds of delays totally happen. It's really tragic. you've got a good story, both monetarily and just in quality of life impacted by removing
Now,
administrative.
on the administrative end, though, the negative position on that, I came across some really interesting information where a lot of the AI is already that's like the first place that they're sort of targeting. That's like, like people are kind of like, dude, we can replace a bunch of these expensive workers with a computer and, like push all this paper and everything like that. Here's the thing. There's this one case study where they were trying to just reduce costs. They had an algorithm beautifully built, you know what I mean, that was supposed to just take costs and reduce them overall. It turned out it was incredibly racist because the people who spend the most money on healthcare are white people. Therefore, the area to reduce the most amount of money is with white people. Like it just, and there was nothing racial hard coded into the algorithm. They didn't say, hey, we should deny black people that, like claims and stuff like that. But that was the outcome that happened because they're just like, listen, take this set of data and analyze where all the cost comes from and target the biggest source of cost and then reduce that. Turns out that the people who got the most attention are the ones who always get the most attention. It's like, and so the thing is, there might be like room for like a time delay counterplan. Like, what I mean? That's something that I think that might, it's not always the sexiest counterplan. It really isn't. You know what I mean? Like, and the competition is a little sketchy. You know what I mean? It's like, I get that. But kind of like, it's like, listen, we are not ready to implement this right now. And United States federal government pouring a bunch of money, forcing it on like society right now is just not the time to be doing this. It's like, we have to work out some of these things before we start implementing it on a national scale for 330 million people.
Sure. And that's where there exists right now. There's like contests and things where individual departments will host literally like a contest with a prize. And if a company can make a submission that solves XYZ problem using artificial intelligence for under, some certain budget, they win the prize money. And they, I imagine like the government gets to keep the intellectual property or like whatever the thing. So those kinds of projects are one way the governments can invest, or like one way the actual US federal government could invest in this kind of solution. And it allows for some competition. Like you get some of the benefit that would otherwise be neg ground of like competition to the marketplace, right? Because if we were to just pick like, all right, it's going to be IBM's Watson, like there's a good artificial intelligence system, we're going to use Watson on all of these things. Okay, that's very specific, but you end up with all of the negatives of that particular thing. So you probably maybe get into a little bit of like effects topicality ground if you're going to host something like a competition. But hell, that's like how the government invests in development of new technology. Like we need a new jet. Okay, cool. Put a bid out there, and then all of the companies that put in for it get to compete. So I think that really falls under the normal means thing anyways, but I would think that administrative costs is one of the areas to cut. The other one that I haven't quite figured out how a case would flow into it, but I think that there's certainly ground for it, is just within prescription drugs. So like the ability to, they call it precision medicine, when it's like being able to diagnose this and prescribe this, look at interactions. And in many areas, like that kind of thing is already, like AI is already being implemented to some measure, right? Like doctors have to put in all the medications that a patient is on. That's why it's one of the first things like EMTs and whatnot that they ask, are you on any medications? Do you have any allergies? So they already have systems in place that are built for that. But I think there is still an avenue when you're talking about like the prescription drug massive crisis of cost, as well as things like opioid crises. Like drugs are a great area to solve a huge ton of problems right now. So if AI can, figure ways to make that cheaper or make that more accessible or, reduce the number of adverse interactions, I think that there's probably some ground in there as well.
Like, I love that. Like, because I did come across that in the little bit of research that I did, where like the precision of it and the, where you're able to weed out the biases. Now, one of the other things that I was just fascinated with was remote diagnoses, right? Like literally using your cell phone and like taking pictures of your face
Is this infected?
It's seriously, like you could they think that you could take pictures of your face, and it's not just physical ailments. One of the most fascinating things that I barely was able to start reading was about how to use your cell phone with AI technology to get mental health diagnoses. Like, I am blown away. I want to know more about that. You know what I mean? And like that's fascinating. That's fascinating. But then it comes back to like the sort of social human aspect of it that I don't know if you're familiar with the series Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. It's like this musical series. Yeah, I don't know if it's like the biggest, most popular thing out there. But one of the most recent episodes was about how they're developing this sort of artificial intelligence, but because their board is made up of all white people, the artificial intelligence thing that has like a little snap, chat feature on it was developed for them. Yeah. And it was misdiagnosing people of color. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because like it was just, like literally just things like lighting and like can affect these diagnoses. And it's fascinating. It's depressing also. You know what I mean? It's that you like we're on this cutting edge, and then you kind of go, oh, damn. You know what I mean? There's still
rolling anything out in mass like that.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like we minutes that we've got to start with, because you got to remember all of this stuff is still written by humans. It's still created by people. You know what I mean?
So, I mean, there's kind of the obvious, more like broad neg ground, but what are some of the things that you are seeing coming out of the neg side? Like, what are some of the core strategies, or maybe some theories that you would start with as far as like why the U.S. federal government shouldn't invest in AI for healthcare?
No, like I would go hard on the sort of racial element of it, just the color aspect of it, because so much of artificial intelligence is written without any bias whatsoever. Language, right? Like the language has zero bias, but then it comes into contact with the physical element, with reality, right? It's like language is not reality, and once you start applying language to reality, you start seeing the shortcomings of it. And so when you have an algorithm that just says, hey, we just want to diagnose, what sort of mental health, issues this person has. Yeah. You have to test that on a beta group, right? And that beta group almost always is lacking in representation across the board. You have to be incredibly conscious about that. I think the negative can really look into like a book called The Ethical Algorithm. It's like I was looking into that for a speech that we were writing on the issue. I think it is absolutely brilliant. It has a whole lot of case studies on how algorithms come up short. And the thing is, like the people that are writing them have the best of intentions. You know what I mean? It's like they want to make the world a better place. And when they're writing them, you can see that they are what they are doing and trying to do it. But the unintended outcomes are man, just depressing.
I think that you can really take that with a whole lot of evidentiary basis to be able to say that like the existing federally backed structures of healthcare that have failed and marginalized people of color universally, like across the board. If it's supposed to be accessible to everyone, who is it actually serving and who is it not serving? And now we're going to have the federal government invest tons more money into that same flawed, premise. Like, I think that can supercharge some of the disadvantages, right? Where you end up with a system that's already not an equitable, just one. Yeah. And it's only going to now receive way greater investment. So I think a lot of the theory just around like the government as a bad actor in general, let alone how it cares for its people, I think you've got a ton of data points to say that it does not act in the people's best interest. Maybe it tries, but it's too big, it's too disconnected, it's too influenced by pharma lobbies. Like, there just is such a huge chasm between the federal government as a legislating body and humans that have ailments, and how like AI can really solve for a lot of things, but that implementation process gets so mucked up, it's probably going to make some things worse. And I think that's probably where you run with the case.
the other thing that I would like, I mean, if I was on the neg, I would really delve into what is intelligence. You know what I mean? Like, because like when you say that the federal government is going to invest in artificial intelligence, like they have to have some sort of definition about what that means and what it doesn't mean. And so many people have this sort of, you know, like I said before, Terminator 2, Matrix sort of like, you know, vision of artificial intelligence. And like that's corrupted by human sort of like impulses. You know what I mean? It's like when those writers of those movies, and they say it's like, oh yeah, look what artificial intelligence can do. I'm like, those machines don't seem very intelligent. Like what's their end goal? You know what I mean? It's like, what's the purpose behind all this stuff? By the way, Peter Pancakes asked if I asked you if we've seen the Rick and Morty about the butter server, about what's my purpose.
Yeah.
I love that. I love Rick and Morty, by the way. Just let you know. But but like there's this sort of assumption that artificial intelligence has the same sort of ambitions that people do. You know what I mean? And I just think
whatever the goal is that is set, that it's set with, right? Like, so whatever humans collectively decide the intention of that artificial being, that's what it does really efficiently. The better the programmers are, the more efficiently it does that thing.
Right. And so the thing is that artificial intelligence is created by a very, very small group of people. And the thing is, their goals, their ambitions are, like you said, supercharged. They are just compounded, right? You know what I mean? Over and over and over again. And so that's the problem. I think on the negative, if you are saying it's like, listen, if the federal government is going to declare right now, we're just going to bankroll what artificial intelligence is right now, I'm like, right now is not the time to do it. Right now is not the time to do it. You know what I mean? It's like we got to work some stuff out before we start making this on a big, broad plan. Because what happens is that you make it permanent. You know what I mean? It's like once you bankroll it on this massive scale, now that is the standard. And it's so hard to go back on that standard once you have put so much money into it.
For sure. So I think I think the affirmative's only ground there is then just find some place where AI is being implemented in a very, very little way, but very successfully, like super narrow guardrails, right? And then just go nuts with that. Like just dump a ton of money into that exact thing. And it's going to be boring, but I'm actually really interested just to see the actual like craft that goes into those rounds.
Yeah, there's some fascinating ways that AI can really, really benefit like human beings. You know what I mean? It's like I do like the fact that like having a machine look at images and diagnose stuff like that has shown a lot of promise. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely. Like there's a ton of data to support that.
Yeah, X-rays, you know, CT scans, you know, MRIs and stuff like that. You know, just having a machine look at that rather than human eyes.
Yep.
That seems to be the best area to go toward, you know what I mean? But there's some other areas that you might start getting into trouble. If I was on the affirmative, I would definitely avoid those.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Anyways, everybody, hey, that's our time. A little bit over, not too much. All right. We got a couple more coming up. All right. We'll see you next week. A little bit more on this series of the NPTE topics. We hope to see you then. We got Tim Seavey from San Diego State University in Visolutions. And I am Jared Kabiga Miller, your debate coach and professor of communications. We will see you next week. Okay?
See ya.
Bye.